Welcome back. You're watching Creating Cooperative Kids, and I'm your host, Bill Corbett. Most of us have figured out that parenting isn't easy. We take what we know, combine it with what we hope to create, and then we do our best to raise our children effectively. But my next guest says that there are some issues that create barriers to becoming great parents, and if we understand what they are, we can overcome them. Ruth Freeman is a licensed clinical social worker and has taught parenting classes for 27 years. She is the co-founder of the Connecticut Parenting Education Network and provides mentoring and professional development for parent educators in the state of Connecticut. Welcome to the show, Ruth.
Thank you.
Trauma. And this is an opportunity for parents to understand what trauma is, because I think we think of trauma as we're being raced to the hospital in an ambulance and we're never going to come back. But trauma is more than that. Can you put a little bit of definition on it?
If you Google trauma, it'll take you to emergency room kind of thing. So
see?
That's a good point.
See?
The reason I came upon trauma is because I listened to parents for years in parenting classes, and I was shocked that these perfectly nice, reasonable, positive people were screaming and yelling and hitting their kids. And it never made any sense to me, because even after they took parenting class, it was hard for them to stop. And when I was introduced to trauma, I was so relieved that their behavior made sense, finally. A simple definition of trauma is whenever you are swamped with emotion and feel overwhelmed, you can't process it, you're just completely swamped or flooded, and you feel like your sanity, your life, or your safety is in jeopardy. And for children, that can happen at times that don't look threatening to grown-ups. So simply just having a screaming parent can feel traumatic to its child, depending on their age, their sensibilities, and all that. And it said, one data point said that 70% of Americans will have experienced at least an event of trauma in their lifetime, and 20% of those will have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think it's important to understand that trauma can be relational, it can be an event, or it can be chronic. So the state of your household as a child might have been traumatic for you.
And so when we were children, if we experience some sort of chaotic and like classic parents hitting each other or fighting.
Yeah, domestic violence.
That plants some stuff in the subconscious that can come out later and create trauma. Is that true?
Yes, and it can, even more importantly, is to understand that you can have 3 children in the house and 2 of them may be traumatized by that behavior and 1 might not, because it's very subjective. So we're often trying to convince our siblings that our parents were crazy, but for one sibling it might have just been a problem, for another sibling it may have absolutely been traumatic.
Is that tied to the traits, the differences in traits to children?
Birth order, sensibilities, biology, constitution, many things. And the other thing that's very important about trauma is that it's biological. So there are biological facts that come with trauma. For example, if you have a 3-year-old and your 3-year-old walks up and kicks you in the knee, for a parent who hasn't been traumatized, that's an event. For a parent who has been traumatized, that is an emergency, and their adrenaline, their biology changes, and they leave their neocortex, the thinking part of their brain, and they go into their amygdala, the fight, flight, or freeze part. So even if they've been in parenting class with you or me on Thursday, on Sunday afternoon, if something triggers that trauma, their neocortex isn't so much online. And this, again, is on a continuum. So for some parents, it's very dramatic. For some parents, it can be mixed. They sort of remember I'm not supposed to hit, but another part of their brain just goes fight, flight, or freeze. And you know what that can look like in parenting.
I was working with a mom one time who came to me for help because she said she was, I was just doing my clinical work with her. So tell me what's going on, what kind of things? And one of the things that she said was she was relating how there were several incidents where, and she had a little girl, and a little boy came after and pushed her down and hit her. And I said, how did you react? And she said, I went after. In that moment, I thought the little boy was in the room. I could see her eyes. And I started working with her and discovered when she was a child, she was abused by her brother. And so there was a chance that that's buried in there. So whenever she saw a male hurting her female, child, it would just come out. And now she's going after like the mother grizzly bear, because that's back there. So if parents who are learning, of course, this isn't a psychology program, but what we may have, kind of educated them a bit. What can parents do, or what should they be directed to do if they discover that they have some of those things that makes them kind of erupt once in a while?
And this is most parents, I want to say this is the majority of parents just in terms of the data. I
Yeah.
just want to remind you of that.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and it can happen in degrees. So the first thing is to understand its biology and to forgive yourself. To start to notice, okay, so I react and I get big. I mean, if I have a room full of 50 parents and I say to them, you know, what's your most important goal for being here today? 80% of them say patience. And I think what they mean is the ability to calm down that fight, flight, or freeze response. So there's many things to think about. You know, it's any individual parent. What do they need to work on this? It's individual for parents. However, there are some basics. If you've experienced any degree of trauma in your childhood, self-care isn't an indulgence, it's a necessity.
Oh,
so, you know, in 12-step programs, they say hungry, angry, lonely, tired, halt. And I sort of translate that into parenting. You have to eat regularly, you have to get enough sleep, and if you were traumatized as a child, you're often devoted to your children in an incredible way, and you think you're supposed to be on 24/7, but you can't be an effective parent 24/7. So they need to, get exercise, get sleep. If they feel the need to be in therapy, get therapy, but work with a therapist who's trauma informed. Therapists may be just dealing with your everyday problems, but you keep having these big reactions that don't make sense. And if the therapist isn't prepared in that way, it's not going to be helpful. And relationships with others, peers, making connections with people, talking to other parents, talking to other people who didn't have perfect childhoods, and getting contact.
What you say is so important. One thing is really important. It's when we're speaking to parents like this, you're normal, unfortunately. The majority of parents have experienced some sort of trauma as children. And it may not even been the parents. They may have witnessed something next door or a relative's
or
house.
A neighborhood.
Or a neighborhood. So this is not to find faults with parents. Just what we ask you to do is just acknowledge it, that it may be an issue and it may be time for you to, number one, what Ruth says is start taking better care of yourself. Ruth, when I teach my parenting class, one of the things I pull out is an oxygen mask from an aircraft.
Yes.
And I pull it out
and I say,
yourself
first.
Yeah. What does the flight attendant say? Put it on yourself first and then put it on someone in your care. And that's so important because, you can, how can you be the best parent if you're not taking care of yourself? And then it goes back to our previous guest with modeling.
Exactly.
Because parents who take care of themselves are going to have children who do the same.
And you were describing, you talked earlier about how the teacher walks into the classroom. We've actually discovered that we have mirror neurons in our brains, mirror neurons. So if somebody around you gets all activated, you get all activated. So if we as parents are feeling anxious and worried and we come into our relationship with our children in that state, and everything is like an emergency for us. If the kid doesn't have his socks on or if his top doesn't match his pants, that could feel like an emergency to a traumatized parent. We're going to act that way, and then the child escalates, and then we wonder why aren't our kids behaving.
Any kind of issue that you're dealing with as parents, seek out professionals like Ruth, like myself, and the first step is just acknowledge it and say you need help, and somebody will help you find the right avenue for getting the healing you need. Thank you so much for being here, Ruth.
Thanks, Bill.
I think we
Thanks
really
for having
educated
me.
parents, and it's so important for us to do that.
Thank you.
We all strive to be the best parent we can, and it's not easy. And speaking of parents, it's time to answer one of the many questions I receive from my parents in the show's email box. Stay with me through the break as I ask my panel of guests to return and answer today's question. Don't hit that channel button. We'll be right back.